What's going on, guys? Super Insane 18 here, and today I am bringing you a post Power of the Elements Floowandereeze deck profile. Now, this is a deck that obviously I've been on for a while. I've brought you guys so much content on this, but I think it gets even better with a very specific card from Power of the Elements. Not to mention, this deck actually has a really good matchup against both Spright and Tearlament, which I will get into in the deck profile, so let's go ahead and jump on in. So we're going to kick things off with the standard Floowandereeze lineup, and that is going to be 1 copy of Stree, 1 copy of Talkin, 3 copies of Robina, 3 copies of our Eaglin, and 2 copies of our Empin. Again, I will always stand by 2 Empin. I think anybody that says you play less than 2 Empin is just inherently incorrect, but I mean, opinions are cool. I think that double is definitely the way to go. I think this lineup is the most standard and the most used, and I think that's for a reason. I think it's just the best lineup that there is, and that's going to be it for the Floowandereeze monsters. Then for our other wing beasts, we of course still have our Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds, our Mist Valley Apex Avian, and our Rise of the Mega Monarch. Again, really standard. I don't think that anything changes here, but we do have one more wing beast in the form of a hand trap, and that is going to be 1 copy of DD Crow. Not only is DD Crow searchable off of the Robina, but there is another card we are playing that we didn't in our last profile that makes this card even better. And then the last of our hand traps is going to be the Dimension Shifter. Now, this card is pretty much the reason that it has such a good matchup against both Spright and Tearlament, because you get to banish all of their cards, which just inherently means you don't get to summon a Totally Awesome if you're playing Spright, because all of your frogs are going to get banished, and you don't get to fuse with your Tearlament cards because their effects activate when they are sent to the graveyard. But going back on Tearlaments for a little bit, the DD Crow as well is another good way to stop it, because all of the Tearlament monsters need to remain in the graveyard to fuse with themselves, because their effects to fuse do require that they use themselves as material. So when they activate, if you DD Crow it, then they pretty much just lose. So that's really cool. Moving into our one of spells, we have a copy of Unexplored Winds. We still have 1 copy of Mystic Mine. Until they ban this, you kind of have to play it. Partially because it's just broken, and partially because if you don't play it, they're not going to ban it. We need to show Konami that this card is a problem, and the only way to do that is to continue to play it. And our 1 copy of Terraforming. Then we have 2 copies of Book of Moon. This is just a really good way to make sure you dodge high-impact hand traps against your deck, like Imperm or Valor, because these let you put your monsters face down, which means they are no longer affected by Imperm or Valor. Plus, not to mention, it is also an interruption. If you don't need it for your turn, you can Book of Moon something that your opponent has, and that could spell the game, especially against something like Spright. If they normal summon a level 2, you put it face down, they can no longer special any of their sprites, so I think that that's pretty good. Then we have 2 copies of Jack in the Hand. This is an incredible consistency card. For those of you that don't know what this does, you reveal 3 level 1 monsters with different names from your deck. Your opponent chooses one and adds it to their hand. You choose one of the other 2, add it to your hand, and shuffle the 3rd back into the deck. Now, this is actually insane for a plethora of reasons. First off, it's going to guarantee that you get either Robina or Eaglin. 9 times out of 10, your opponent is going to take the Robina just so that you don't have it, because Robina is the best 1-card starter. But if you have any other birds in your hand, then the Eaglin will suffice just as well, not to mention if you have map or a way into your map as well, or the advent of adventure. But the crazy part is that specifically against the Tearlament and the Despia matchup, they are forced to take DD Crow, because you're going to reveal DD Crow, Robina, and Eaglin. If Tearlament or Despia doesn't take DD Crow, that pretty much just ruins their entire turn. We've already gone over Tearlaments, how if you DD Crow the monster activating its effect, they can no longer fuse, but against something like Despia, if you DD Crow the branded in red target, then they can't use their branded in red to interrupt you, because they have to get the add to be able to fusion summon, so it forces them to take that card, guaranteeing that you get the Robina in the very least those 2 matchups. But again, even just getting the Eaglin is definitely enough to boost the consistency of this deck, and I think this card is incredible. Shout out to Oscar. I showed you guys in one of the videos, he took top 16 at the North American Championship, and I got this idea from him, so gonna give credit where credit is due. Then we have our 3 copies of Floowandereeze and the Advent of Adventure. Again, this is just staples at this point. This is something you're always going to play in Flu, along with the 3 copies of Magnificent Map. This is easily the best card in the deck because it turns any of your birds into full combo. Then we have our consistency pieces in Pot of Prosperity and Pot of Duality. You need to play these because digging for 9 cards is essential. 9 times out of 10, Floowandereeze will just lose to itself, so you need to make sure that you have the consistency that you need to get the cards that you have to play. Then the new addition from Power of the Elements, we have 3 copies of Ultimate Slayer. This is, in my opinion, the best board breaker that Floowandereeze can play, and the reason is because it's a non-responsive board breaker that removes the target. When you're looking at cards like Dark Ruler No More, you yes get to blanket negate the board, but you have a little trouble clearing it because your best clear is Ryza, and Ryza at best is only going to get rid of 2 materials on the field and then swing into another. You're not doing any damage because Dark Ruler, but Ultimate Slayer kind of mitigates all that. You get to get rid of the biggest problem and then play through the rest of it, so I think this is the best board breaker for Floowandereeze to play. And then finishing up the main deck, we have 1 Dreaming Town. That is going to be 40 cards. Let's show you guys the extra deck. So moving into the extra deck, obviously Floowandereeze doesn't necessarily need it, which is why playing a card like Ultimate Slayer is absolutely incredible. So we are going to start out with the Ultimate Slayer targets. We have 1 copy of Garura Wings of Resonant. I always have trouble saying that. I think this card is incredible because it is a draw 1. You could swap this out for something like Natis if you wanted to get more destructions, so you can Ultimate Slayer, send Natis, remove 1, Natis, pop another card, but I think the draw 1 is a little bit more important because, again, 9 times out of 10 Flu is losing to itself and its consistency, so getting a draw is one of the ways to help that consistency out. Then we are playing Wind Pegasus ad Ignister. A lot of the times when I want to play Ultimate Slayer, I want to play the Omega because Omega can pretty much do 2 different things. You can either recycle your own resources, or you can prevent your opponent from having a resource of their own. But for Flu specifically, since all of your stuff is getting banished and you're playing D-Shifter, I think Wind Pegasus is a little bit better just because you can get rid of an opponent's card if they destroy one of your cards, whether it be by battle or card effect. So for this specifically, I think it's better than Omega. Then we have Totally Awesome. Totally Awesome is, in my opinion, the best XYZ target for a couple of reasons. The main one is that when you send it off the Ultimate Slayer to get rid of an XYZ, it can put itself back into the extra deck, making your other 2 copies of Ultimate Slayer live for later in the game. And specifically for Floowandereeze, if you are under something like Lancia, or they prevent you from banishing, or you discard cards, or whatever it is, you do play 2 Water Birds, being Robina and Stree, so the Toad will be able to add one of those back to your hand in a very pinch scenario. So I think that the utility there is pretty good for this deck, but just generalized, Toad is obviously the best Ultimate Slayer target for XYZs. And then the last Ultimate Slayer target that we're going to play is going to be the Tri-Brigade Friedrich. Now, a lot of people are playing the Trouble Sunny because you can then play the Evil Twin in your main deck and clear 2 cards for 1. But again, we really want to hammer in the consistency for the Floowandereeze, so the ability to draw an additional card for the Friedrich is absolutely clutch. Yes, you have to put a card back, but if you needed to draw a card, then obviously all 5 cards in your hand weren't live, so putting 1 back isn't really a downside, but getting that draw can change the game. Then into our generic extra deck, even though Floowandereeze doesn't need it, we want to make sure that it's as playable as possible for those very niche scenarios. So we obviously have our Zeus package with Assembled Nightingale, Downward Magician, and Zeus. This is probably the most made extra deck monsters just because you're able to clear boards. Then we have 1 copy of Relinquished Anima and 1 copy of Heartbeat Conductor. Relinquished Anima is really funny because a lot of people just don't respect it when they see you're playing Flu, so they'll put a really high impact monster in a zone that Anima can point to, and then you pretty much either A, force a negate, or B, just steal their monster. The Heartbeat Conductor, I mentioned it in the last profile, it's really clutch for getting out of opposing Mystic Binds, because you can link all of your stuff down into a Heartbeat Conductor since it is a winged beast. Then you can use the Advent of Adventure to clear it from your field, get a search, which will also put you at 0 monsters, making sure that you can get rid of the opponent's Mystic Mine. Then we have the 3 important Charmers for the deck, which are Dark, Water, and Wind. Dark is able to be made off of the Anima, which is part of the other reason that we play it, but these are the 3 that are best for the format. Everything always has Darks. Water is pretty much for the Marincess matchup, and then Wind you can play against anything that plays Baron, and these are pretty much your stepping stone into your access code line with Selene. For those of you that don't know, Dimension Shifter is a spellcaster, so if you can make either of the Charmers, then you can go into Selene, summon back your D-Shifter, make the access code, and that is a very good way to push for game. And the final card is going to be the Underworld Goddess. This is because there are certain cards that you just cannot get over, and this is the best way to do so. So we have to make sure that we can play it. That's going to be it for the extra deck. Let's go ahead and just break down everything else. So there you guys have it. That is going to be my updated Power of the Elements Flundereeze deck profile. Not much has changed since the last variant that I showed you guys. There are a couple of changes though, mainly being the DD Crow, the Jack in the Hand, and the Ultimate Slayers, and then obviously the extra deck has quite a bit of change as well due to the Ultimate Slayers, but I really think that this is the correct call if you don't want to play either Spright or Tearlament, because I think this is definitely the third best deck of the format, with those two just being ahead of it. This does have a phenomenal matchup against those two, but those two just are better decks all around. So I think if you want to play something that you can get it pretty cheap, considering that you can replace the Prosperities with Extravagance and everything else is really not all that expensive, I think this is definitely a very good way to go. And with the Ultimate Slayer, I think we finally fixed one of the problems that Flu has had since the day it came out, which is board breaking. So there you guys have it. If you liked it, you know the deal. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, like, comment, share with your friends, and maybe consider supporting me on Patreon. That is where I post all of my side decks, and the side deck for this is already up there. But for just $1, you can support the channel in a way that I would never be able to tell you how much I fully appreciate. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.